Everyone in Elena S.'s family thought she was the responsible daughter who would always pay, always forgive, and always clean up their mess. They were wrong. As a wealth management lead, Elena knew exactly where every dollar went. She had paid their mortgage for years, covered taxes, saved their house from foreclosure, and even handled a $25,000 wedding crisis. But when her parents handed that same house to her spoiled sister and her fake tech mogul husband, Elena stopped being their safety net and started treating them like a bad investment.
I am 34-year-old Elena. 2 a.m. The phone rings. I am in my office, sipping wine, staring at the skyline. The caller ID says sheriff. A gruff officer says my parents, Martha and Arthur, filed a report. They claim I cut the power and water at their Lake Tahoe home. He demands he restore them, citing squatter rights. I take a slow sip, looking at the federal warrant sitting on my desk. I smile at the phone, voice cold and polite. That is fine. Officer, let them sit in the dark. Tomorrow morning, federal prison will give them free housing and all the utilities they need. Before I reveal how they tried to scam me and landed in cuffs, tell me where you are watching from. Subscribe if you have dealt with toxic family members who treat you like a walking bank. You will want to see how this trap snaps shut. To see how my parents end up freezing while the feds moved in, look back 2 months. It was Sister Chloe's wedding day. At 28, Chloe was a vapid influencer who cared only for her online aesthetic. She was marrying Julian, a smooth talker claiming to be a tech mogul. His crypto scheme sounded like total fraud to anyone with a brain. As a wealth management lead, I was expected to fund their fake lifestyle. Defend your lifestyle. The venue was drowning in lilies and champagne. Near the ice sculpture, my mother, Martha, rushed over, looking frantic. She dragged me into hall, whispering that my father's card was declined for the catering bill. They threatened to pull the food. Without blinking, I handed over my card for $25,000. I had been bailing them out for 6 years, so saving the image was routine. I returned to my table, waiting for a thank you that never came. The real show started when my father hit the mic. The champagne tower sparkled under the lights. Standing by the flowers, I did the math. As a consultant, I know a bad investment. This wedding was a disaster. Chloe held court by the ice, wearing a dress that cost more than a car, snapping photos. Her groom, Julian, stood nearby laughing loudly. He told everyone he was a tech CEO. When asked what his company did, he spewed buzzwords about blockchain. I had checked his firm last month. It was a hollow shell registered to a PO box. I checked my watch, desperate to leave. I had stayed near the exits, but in my family, staying out of the way never meant staying out of the wallet. Martha appeared beside me, makeup smeared, clutching her purse until her knuckles turned white. She hauled me toward the service hall. Caroline, we have a huge emergency, she hissed. I pulled away, smoothing my dress. What kind of emergency? Before she could answer, my father Arthur showed up, followed by a frustrated caterer. Arthur wiped his brow, giving me that fake panic look. Caroline, thank God. A bank mix-up. My card was flagged for fraud. The account is frozen, and this man needs payment now or he pulls the dinner. I looked at the caterer. What is the balance? $25,000, he said flatly. The contract requires payment before service. I have 5 minutes before I clear the kitchen. I stared at them, unimpressed. You told me this was paid weeks ago. We thought it was, Martha stammered, her voice rising. There were overages. The flowers, the premium bar Julian wanted. We can't let them pull the food, Caroline. Julian has family here from Atlanta who flew first class. We will look like peasants if the staff packs up. It is a temporary hold, Arthur added, patting my shoulder. You know how banks are. Put it on your card. I will wire the money Monday. I looked at him, knowing exactly what a max limit looks like. There was no fraud alert. They were broke. They blew money they did not have to keep up the facade. I am not paying $25,000 for this, I said firmly. Figure it out. Tell Chloe to use her wedding money. Martha gasped, grabbing my wrist again. You cannot do this to your sister. Do you want to humiliate us? If the food stops, everyone will know we are poor. You are poor, I said coldly. I am not. Please, Caroline. Arthur pleaded, leaning in. Do this one thing. We have done so much for you. We are family. If you do not pay, Chloe will be crushed. You make enough to cover a temporary charge. They had perfected this routine. The fake crisis, the loyalty trip, the manipulation. I stood there, Hearing the band play, I thought about the mortgage payments I had made for 6 years. I thought about the thousands I had funneled into their accounts while they praised Julian's fake business. If I left, the wedding would fall apart, Chloe would throw a fit, and my parents would blame me for years. I did not want the drama. I just want the night to end. I opened my purse and pulled out my corporate card. I hand it to the caterer, ignoring them. Run it, I said, voice dead. He swiped the card, a beep, payment approved. We start dinner now, he said, turning away. Martha allowed a huge sigh. Thank heavens. You are a lifesaver. Arthur straightened his tie, shifting from desperate to arrogant. See? Minor speed bump. I will get that back to you next week. Do not worry. I took the card back, knowing I'd never see a cent of that $25,000. I said nothing. I just looked at them, as an extortion, accepting this as an extortion fee for my silence. Come on, Martha whispered, latching onto my father. We need to reach the table before speeches start. They hurried toward the ballroom, leaving me behind. I took a breath, smoothing my dress. The ransom was paid. Crisis averted. I figured I would just endure the dinner, listen to the speeches, then head home for a quiet night. He walked inside and sat at a table far from the stage. The lights dimmed and the band started playing. I watched my father march to the stage, grabbing the mic. He tapped it twice, flashing that trademark grin. I sipped my water, bracing for a generic toast. I had no idea the real betrayal was about to drop. The room went dead silent. He stood under the lights, radiating the fake humility he had perfected over decades. He hoisted his glass, commanding the room. Family is not just a word to us, he began, voice booming through the speakers. It is an action, a lifelong commitment. When we look at Chloe and Julian today, we see the future. Two brilliant people ready to conquer the world. I took a slow sip of water. My heart rate stayed steady, but my mind started tallying the lies. Julian, my boy, he continued, turning to the table. You are a genius, a tech founder who will change finance forever. I'd be prouder. Julian stood up, hand on his heart, giving a modest bow that looked entirely rehearsed. The crowd murmured in adoration. Starting life needs a solid foundation, my father said, tone growing grandiose. We know how brutal the housing market is for young couples today. The economy is harsh. A parent's duty is to help their children start on solid ground. He paused for effect. I watched my mother dab her eye with a tissue, careful not to ruin her makeup. For 30 years, our suburban home has been our sanctuary, he announced, voice thick with fake emotion. It is where Chloe took her first steps, where we celebrated everything. But a house is just bricks until a family fills it with love. We decided it is time for a new generation to make memories there. The ballroom grew perfectly still. Everyone leaned in, waiting for the big moment. Chloe and Julian, he smiled, projecting to the back. As your wedding gift, we are signing over the deed to the family home. Fully paid off. An $800,000 estate to start your new life without a single financial worry. For a second, the room was so quiet I heard the air conditioning hum. Then absolute chaos erupted. The crowd went wild. Standing ovation, cheering, whistling, and my relatives jumping for joy. On stage, the performance hit a fever pitch. Sarah burst into tears, throwing her arms around my father. Mark rushed in, pulling my mother into a perfectly staged, emotional embrace. I sat frozen at table 42, my ice water sweating onto my fingertips. My brain, trained for years of financial analysis, suddenly short-circuited. A fully paid-off house. The words bounced around my skull like punches. My parents were broke. 6 years ago, Thomas gambled away their savings. 60 days from foreclosure, Brenda begged me for a bailout as a wealth management consultant. I knew it was a disaster. But they were my parents. I stepped in. For 6 years, I wired $3,500 every month to their lender. I paid the taxes and the emergency repairs. I sacrificed my own investments to keep a roof over their heads. I personally poured over $250,000 into that place to stop an auction. Yet, 20 minutes ago, my mother grabbed my arm, panicking because they could not afford the catering bill. Now, they were taking credit for gifting an $800,000 estate they did not even own. An estate kept afloat only by my monthly payments. They were handing my life's work to an arrogant grifter as a wedding gift. I watched the guests tear up at this fake display of love. Mark looked like he had won the lottery. I slowly set my glass down. The cheering died down as guests returned to their seats. I stared at the head table. Brenda was beaming. Then her eyes locked onto me. The smile vanished. She knew exactly what I was calculating. She quickly looked away and turned her back, forcing a conversation with Mark. The betrayal hit with a cold, absolute clarity. They used me as a silent ATM just to buy the admiration of strangers and impress a golden child who never worked a day in her life. I grabbed my clutch and stood. The main course was coming, but my appetite was gone. I walked out, heels clicking on the marble. No scene. I would wait in the bridal suite. It smelled of hairspray and lilies. I sat in a high-backed chair, waiting. The ballroom bass vibrated through the floorboards. I checked my watch. 11:45. Cake were done. The speeches were done. The cake was cut. Soon the couple would come to change for their exit. The heavy doors swung open. Laughter spilled in. Sarah walked in first, struggling with her massive gown. Mark followed, bottle in hand. My parent trailed behind, still riding their performance high. Sarah complained about her feet, then gushed about how everyone would talk about this gift for years. It was the perfect announcement. Brenda beamed at her husband. "Your father delivered it beautifully," she said. "You two are set for life." I cleared my throat. The room went silent. 4 heads snapped toward me. The laughter evaporated instantly. Thomas stiffened, and Brenda's smile hardened into thin white line. Sarah rolled her eyes, arms crossed. Mark looked annoyed his moment was being ruined. Thomas dropped his charm. "Caroline, what you doing here? You should be mingling." I stood up, clutch in hand. "I am not staying for the exit. I came to clear up a few things about your gift." Brenda stepped between us. "Do not bring your drama to your sister's suite. It is her night. I am thrilled for her." I lied. "I am just curious about the math. You told 300 people you were gifting an $800,000 estate, debt-free." Mark chimed in, chugging chain. "It is about building a foundation. You work in wealth management, you should understand leverage. We are using that equity to scale my new platform. A power for the family." He sounded like a walking podcast of financial buzzwords. "Real wealth requires actual assets," I said. I looked at my father. "You do not own that house, Thomas. You have not owned it in 6 years. Keep it down," he hissed, glancing at the hallway. "Let them hear," I replied. "I want Sarah and Mark to know exactly what they are inheriting. They are getting a massive mortgage, a mortgage I have been paying." Sarah sighed. "Why do you always make this about you? Mom and Dad gave us the house. Why can you not just be happy for us? Jealousy is so ugly." "Jealous?" The word tasted like ash. "Sarah, I have wired $3,500 every month for 6 years. I pay property taxes and repairs. I saved our parents from foreclosure while they bought you luxury handbags. You are wearing a dress that costs a year's salary? And you call me jealous?" Brenda glared. "You make a fortune, Caroline. Helping family is what you do. You do not want support," I said. "You want a sponsor. You even made me cover $25,000 in catering because you blew your money on appearances. We will pay you back." Thomas barked, face flushing. It was a cash flow issue. "I am not talking about the food," I said coldly. "I am talking about the house. I am done. I am canceling the mortgage auto, draft, the property tax escrow, and every emergency credit card you have been using. If Mark is such a tech genius, he can cover the monthly payment. Welcome to home ownership." "Sarah." She stared at me, then at Mark in panic. Mark lowered his champagne. "Wait, what mortgage? Thomas said the house was paid off. He promised $800,000 in equity. He lied to you," I said. I turned to leave. I had drawn my line. But Brenda let out a mocking laugh that echoed off the mirrors. "Cancel the payments," she sneered. "Go ahead, Caroline. Cut us off. We do not care." He paused at the door and looked back. "You do not care? The bank will foreclose in 90 days if the payments stop. You will be on the street." "No, we will not," Brenda smiled. It was the look of a predator. "We do not need your money. You think you are smart with your spreadsheets, but you do not control us." Thomas looked smug. "Your mother is right. Stop paying. It is not our problem anymore." "What are you talking about?" I demanded. Brenda leaned in, voice dripping with triumph. "I went to county clerk. I finished the deed transfer last. Sarah is the sole legal owner now. We gave it to her free and clear." My mind raced. "That is legally impossible with an active mortgage." I kept my voice steady. "The bank will demand the full balance immediately." "Oh, please," Mark scoffed. "You are trying to scare us. Lawyers handle transfers all the time. The bank does not care as long as someone pays." And someone will keep paying, Brenda said, staring into my eyes. Because if it goes into foreclosure, it destroys the credit of whoever is on the loan. My mother's audacity hit me like a train. She transferred the house to Sarah but left the debt in my parents' names, assuming I would keep paying to protect them. They stole the asset and left me with the liability, hoping I would not let them go bankrupt. Sarah smirked, adjusting her tiara. Thanks for the house, Caroline. We will invite you over for pool parties. I looked at the four of them, the coward, the brat, the leech, and the master manipulator. I could have screamed, but I did not. I am a consultant. I deal with hostile takeovers and corporate warfare. When your enemy makes a catastrophic mistake, you do not warn them. You let them dig their own grave. Brenda thought she was a genius for filing that deed, but she had no idea what kind of legal trap she just walked into. She did not know what I knew about the specific details of that property title. The silence in the room was heavy. They were waiting for me to explode. Instead, he smoothed my dress and looked at my mother with the cold detachment of a mortician. Enjoy the house, Sarah, I said. My voice was calm and final. I turned the brass knob, opened the door, and stepped out. Caroline, wait, Thomas called out, his voice wavering. I did not stop. I did not look back. I left the estate, the night air biting cold. I handed my ticket to the valet and climbed in my car. As I drove back toward Chicago, I pulled out my phone and went through my contacts. One by one, I blocked them all: my sister, my parents, even the relatives who enabled their greed. They wanted to commit fraud to fuel their delusions. Fine. They had no idea I was about to let them legally implode. 2 months of total silence followed. No frantic texts about bank balances. I had finally cut the financial umbilical cord that had drained me for 6 years. I severed all financial ties and blocked my family across every platform. Life in Chicago hit peak efficiency. I closed a major merger and enjoyed the quiet of my penthouse, watching my wealth grow without their constant fake emergencies. But I knew the peace wouldn't last. The drama finally hit on a rainy Tuesday. My office line buzzed, a line almost no one had. I expected a client, but heard my mother trembling voice instead. Caroline, please, do not hang up, she begged. We are in a total nightmare. I leaned back in my chair, staying deathly silent. Brenda sobbed that they were stuck in a motel parking lot. Their credit cards declined. You have to help us, she pleaded. I kept my voice icy. What happened to that $800,000 estate, Brenda? I thought that was for the golden couple and their generational wealth. A bitter sob broke out. Stephanie and Donovan kicked us out, she confessed. They changed the locks. How do you get evicted from a house you just gave away? Then Thomas grabbed the phone, his voice thick with panic. Caroline, this is no joke. Donovan manipulated your sister. He claimed he needed the house for his crypto server farm. They threw our clothes in garbage bags and dumped us on the porch. Sounds like a brilliant business move by Donovan, he replied. It is exactly what you taught Stephanie to do. This is your fault, Thomas snapped. If you had kept paying the mortgage, they would not be so stressed. I stopped spinning my pen. The mortgage is in your name, Thomas. You handed them the deed but kept the debt. You built your own cage. We made a mistake, Brenda cried. We were foolish. We thought we were securing Stephanie's future, but they treated us like trash. We need your Lake Tahoe house, Thomas demanded, ignoring her. I paused, making sure I heard him correctly. You want my vacation home? It is empty, Thomas insisted. You owe us, Caroline. We are your parents. You cannot put us on the street. I glanced at the photo of my tall cabin, a glass, walled sanctuary. The thought of them polluting it was sickening. Listen clearly, I said, my voice turning to ice. You treated me like zank for 6 years, shamed me at my own wedding, and handed my sacrifice to your favorite child. Now you want my vacation home? Family is in action, Brenda. I am not your safety net anymore. I will call your firm, Thomas threatened. I will tell them how you abuse your parents. I will make a scene. I smiled, knowing my line was recording every word. You can try, Thomas, but the answer is no. You will not get a cent. You made your bed with Donovan and Stephanie. Sleep in the parking lot. He hung up. They were broke, homeless, and betrayed by the very people they had sacrificed everything to please. Classic karma. But looking at the Chicago skyline, I knew my father's pride would never accept defeat. I knew they would try to force their way into Tahoe House. I was ready. The notification hit 3 days later, a Friday night. My screen flashed. Motion detected at Lake Tahoe front entry. My heart rate stayed steady. I opened my security app. A beat-up rental sedan sat in the driveway of my cabin, a fortress I bought with my own hard-earned money. Thomas and Brenda stepped out, dragging garbage bags of clothes. Thomas walked to the oak door and pulled a brass key from his coat. I had forgotten to change that old deadbolt. The door swung open. My security system started its 30-second countdown to the siren. I watched the hallway camera. Thomas did not hesitate. He pulled a heavy wrench from his jacket and smashed the digital panel right off the wall. Plastic shards flew everywhere. He ripped out the wiring, killing the alarm. This was a calculated, violent break-in. Brenda followed, dragging trash across my custom rugs. She looked around with zero shame, only greedy entitled satisfaction. She dumped her bags on my white leather couch and headed for the kitchen. I watched via the feed as my mother hunted through my private wine collection, grabbing a vintage Cabernet I had saved for a major promotion. They toasted to their own cleverness, certain they had won. They knew the law once they were inside. The power shifted. They banked on squatter rights. In their minds, I was still that pushover daughter who paid their bills to keep the peace. They thought I would be paralyzed by family guilt. They had no idea that woman was gone. I hit record on my app, logging every detail of their break-in, and that's smug toast. I saved everything to a secure server. They wanted a high-stakes game of real estate theft. I grabbed my phone and dialed my lawyer, Mitchell. This wasn't about to end the way they planned. I called the sheriff to report a break-in at my cabin. I kept it clinical, no mention they were my parents. Just intruders. 20 minutes later, patrol lights hit the snow. My parent acted fast. My father, Mark, opened the door with the practiced calm of a suburban patriarch, ready to play the victim. Mark gave a performance, claiming a family misunderstanding. He blamed a glitchy keypad for the damage. The deputy stepped inside, skeptical. Mark played his ace, a folder of fake papers. He claimed they were tenants with a verbal lease. I watched from my screen, knowing exactly what those pathetic forgeries were worth. Total fraud. He used old phone bill payments as proof of rent. It sounded convincing enough at 2 a.m. The deputy called me. I told him they broke in and smashed my gear. I wanted them cuffed. I'm cuffed. But the deputy just sighed, telling me they had established presence and his hands were tied. He told me it was a civil matter. No arrest, no eviction tonight. My stomach dropped. They were staying, and I had to deal with the court system for months. The officer left, leaving my parents in control. I stared at the feed, watching them celebrate a win that wouldn't last the week. Mark locked the deadbolt and turned to the camera. He knew I was watching. He raised his wine glass in a mocking toast, mouthing a thank you. He thought he had outsmarted me with his fake lease and suburban charm. He had no idea what was coming. The smirk didn't anger me, it focused me. I called Grant, my litigate attorney. He laughed at the trap they had set. Nevada tenant laws are tough. We didn't need an eviction. We needed a biohazard emergency. I transferred the house into a private company I owned. Now the game changed. Grant had a contact in the environmental business. They declared the property a biohazard due to toxic mold in the vents. Under state law, a corny meant all utilities had to be cut immediately. It bypassed tenant rights entirely. By Tuesday, the trap was set. The power and water were killed. The temperature outside plummeted into the teens. I watched from my office as the lights died and the heat vanished. Thomas was frantic, flicking switches and screaming at utility companies. Panic set in when they told him the house was under a mandatory health quarantine. He was trapped in the cold. The police returned, but this time they told my father to leave. Staying in a biohazard zone was a crime. His fake lease was suddenly worthless. I watched on my screen as they scrambled to pack trash bags in the freezing dark. They tried to steal my home. I just froze them out. They stumbled down the icy porch, tossing bags into a beat-up rental. I watched them pull away, vanishing in the night, broke and finished. I sipped my wine and prepped the next move. The day after that blizzard, I walked into Elias's office. That rental car was on the start. My parents were ruined, but my real problem remained. Sarah and Mark were still living in the $1 million mansion I had saved from foreclosure. Hosting parties, playing the success story, living a lie. Time to wreck their reality. I sat across from Elias at his glass table. The city view was great, but I was focused on the files between us. Elias looked sharp, waiting for my cue. He knew the drill. I didn't want my sister and her husband evicted. I wanted the asset liquidated. Sell it, take my share, and leave them with nothing. Elias opened a folder, pushing his glasses up. He looked at me, calculating. Caroline, if we are forcing a partition sale, we need to prove your standing. Paying their mortgage for 6 years doesn't automatically make you an owner. I leaned back, smiling. My parents thought I was just the dutiful daughter paying their debts out of guilt. They were wrong. I am a wealth manager. I don't pour $300,000 in a sinking ship without taking the wheel. I tap the tick in the wheel. I tap the thickest phi. Open the records from 6 years ago. Check the date the bank was 60 days from foreclosure. Elias scanned the fine print, finding the contract with the county seal. A slow grin spread across his face. 6 years ago, when my parents begged for a bailout, I gave them an ultimatum. I covered the past due balance, the monthly payments, the taxes, and repairs. But I demanded equity. I forced them to sign a deed adding my name to the title as a co-owner. No fine print. I sat them with a lawyer and forced them to sign in blue ink. Desperate to hide their bankruptcy, they signed away half their equity for my cash. Elias dropped the deed on the glass. You own 50% of this estate, Caroline. This is not a gentleman's agreement. It is cold registered law. Correct, I said, my voice steady. My parents never owned that house alone, only half. The rest is mine. That is why their housewarming party was a joke. Mark stood there showing off a home that was mortgaged and co-owned by the woman sitting in the back. Elias tapped his pen, eyes tracking the county database on his laptop. If you hold 50%, we have a major problem. Elias's tone turned urgent. He spun the laptop toward me. I scanned the files. The history showed a quitclaim deed. It claimed the house was transferred entirely from my parents to my sister and Mark. They were now the sole owners of $1 million estate. Legally impossible, I said. A rush of adrenaline hitting me. A quitclaim deed only moves the interest the grantor actually holds. They could transfer their half, but my 50%? That requires my notarized signature. He never signed it. Elias nodded, his face hardening. He downloaded the filing from the county clerk. We watched the document load. We both leaned in. There was my father's messy sprawl, my mother's script, and my own signature. It was black, bold, and precise, a perfect imitation of my style. I stared, cold realization setting in. I had never touched that document. I never authorized giving my sister and her scammer husband $250,000 in equity. The room went silent as I looked at Elias. The game had shifted. It was no longer a family squabble. It was a criminal conspiracy. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I sat back, my mind racing through the fallout. My previous wins were nothing compared to the storm I was about to unleash. Elias's screen lit the dark wood of the table. I leaned in again. My eyes traced the letters of my name. Terrifyingly accurate, but a fake. I pointed to a stroke. I never dragged the ink down. I flick it up. This is a forgery. Elias didn't blink, just zoomed in. Forging a birthday card is a feud. Forging a deed to steal real estate? That is a massive escalation. My parents hadn't just lied to me. They committed a premeditated crime. They sat there, looked at a small fortune, and signed my name to steal my equity. They handed my blood and sweat to my sister just to play house. Elias adjusted his glasses. A signature alone is not enough. He warned, law requires strict authentication. Someone had to verify you signed it freely. He scrolled to the corner. A circular black stamp, a notary public. Elias read the name and pulled up the licensing database. Within 2 minutes, we had a hit. The notary ran a shop in a rundown strip mall, handling bail bonds. He was the exact kind of guy my father could bribe with an envelope of cash. My father was a salesman. He knew how to talk to desperate people. Maybe he flashed some hundreds and spun a lie about a busy daughter. Either way, he verified a ghost. I looked at Elias. What does this mean for a prosecution? I needed to hear the weight of the law. I wanted to measure the destruction heading their way. Elias folded his hands. We are looking at a federal indictment, Caroline. This is titled fraud. By filing a forged deed. They committed perjury and record fraud. By moving an asset worth nearly $1 million, they triggered wire fraud. The notary will lose his license and face prison. But your parents? He paused. They are looking at conspiracy and grand theft. High-level felonies. They are looking at 5 to 10 years in a federal penitentiary. 10 years. I let it sink in. A normal daughter might cry for her aging parents. But I had been their financial shield for 6 years. I gave them every chance to live with honor. Instead, they chose felonies just so their golden child could live in luxury. They risked prison just to spite me. The betrayal severed the last thread of obligation. They weren't my parents anymore. They were thieves. I felt a surge of freedom. The gloves were off. We need to contact the county office, Elias said, reaching for the phone. We will file an affidavit of forgery and alert the FBI. Stop, I said. Do not file it yet. Don't call the police. Elias stared, confused. This is a felony, Caroline. They stole your property. If we don't report it, they could leverage it. I know what they will do, Elias. That is why we wait. I walked to the window, looking at the city. I pictured Mark in my home playing the brilliant tech mogul. I thought about my sister posting videos of her beautiful debt-free house. Consider who we are dealing with, I said. Mark is a fake CEO who needs cash for his made-up crypto schemes. My sister spends fortunes to fake her success. They think they own $1 million estate free and clear. What does a scammer do with a massive asset? He leverages it. Elias's eyes widened. He lowered the phone. You think he will take out a home equity loan? I guarantee it, I replied. He wants quick cash. He is going to walk into bank, present that forged deed, and use my home as collateral for a massive loan. He wants to drain the equity dry. And if he does? Elias asked, a dark smile forming. He commits bank fraud. A much more serious federal crime. Exactly, I said, tapping the document. If we strike now, my parents face forgery charges, but my sister and her husband play the victims. They will claim they had no idea the deed was fake. They will beg the judge and walk free. But if we let Mark take that fake deed to a bank and sign for a $500,000 loan, he becomes a federal criminal. I told Elias to quietly flag the title a silent tripwire. The moment a bank underwriter tried to finalize that loan, the system would alert us. We would catch them defrauding a major bank. We were letting their greed build their own gallows. I told Elias to keep his hand on the trigger. We were going to let Mark walk into the bank and sign his own death warrant. I stepped out into the biting wind. The cold air matched the chill in my veins. I climbed into my car, heading to my penthouse. I did not cry. The suffocating weight of parental betrayal was gone. Instead, my mind began a cold audit of the last 6 years. I remembered their desperation, my father's shaking hands. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. They signed that deed giving me 50% equity, full of gratitude. Now the math finally made sense. They never saw that signature as a binding contract. To them, my name on the deed was just a temporary hurdle. A cheap price for a lifelong ATM. I thought about Sarah. Since childhood, she was their golden child. She had the charm and total lack of accountability they craved. She played the perfect dependent, letting them feel vital. I was the driven, analytical outlier. My success was a slap in the face to their failures. They hated my wealth but felt entitled to drain it. They saw my income not as the product of my 80-hour work weeks, but as a family fund to be pillaged for Sarah. Then came Jackson. When Sarah brought him home in rented suits, pitching his hollow crypto startup, my parents were hooked. He spoke their language of unearned luxury. They wanted to ride the billionaire fantasy he sold. But Jackson had zero capital. He needed a stage. He needed the appearance of massive wealth to peddle his fraudulent empire. My parents knew their crumbling bank accounts would never impress this golden son-in-law. So they plotted to steal the ultimate prop. The forgery killed my last shred of empathy. This wasn't a panic move. This was a cold conspiracy. They researched how to bypass a co-owner. They found a crooked notary in a strip mall. They sat at a table and carefully mimicked my signature. They practiced robbing me. They committed a felony with steady hands, banking on my loyalty to keep me silent. They weaponized my love. I became the beast of burden, dragging their debts while they paraded Jackson and Sarah in a golden carriage. For 6 years. Every $3,500 transfer was me funding my own heist. It was maintaining the credit score they needed to finish this theft. Sitting in my car, everything shifted. The programming that says you must love your parents burned away, leaving a cold, empty void. Brenda and Thomas were no longer my parents. They were hostage liabilities. Sarah and Jackson were not family. They were squatters holding stolen goods. I am an asset manager who dismantles toxic structures and liquidates bad investments. I destroy parasites for a living. Time to bring that expertise home. No more confrontations. No more begging for apologies. Explanations are for people who want to fix things. I only cared about recovery and total destruction. They chose to play a high-stakes game proper to remove fraud or fake fraud to fund a fake life. I was going to let them play. I would let them walk into the casino, put all their stolen chips on the table, then lock the doors and burn the place down. My car reached my tower. I felt lighter and far more dangerous. By the time I hit my penthouse, the plan was locked. I wouldn't say a word. I would watch them bask in stolen glory and wait for Jackson's greed to spring my trap. A thief never stops at one crime. They always grab for more. And I would make sure his next reach was his final one. He returned to Miller's office at 8 sharp. The Chicago skyline was gray, but the lights in the conference room were blinding. Miller had the paperwork ready. He drafted a formal complaint for the state attorney, detailing the forgery, the corrupt notary, and the illegal transfer. Miller held his phone, ready to call the fraud unit. Caroline, warrants could be issued by tomorrow, he promised. The prosecutor would love this clear cut case of property theft. Thomas and Brenda would be arrested and the transfer voided. I pushed the papers back, my voice cold. Shred it? No police, no lawyers, no alerts. Miller stared, eyes wide. He adjusted his glasses, looking from the file to my face. Caroline, they stole $250,000, he stammered. We have to report this before they sell the property. I shook my head. They won't sell. Selling takes work. Sarah is busy filming house tours for followers, playing the young, wealthy homeowner. Donovan is playing the startup founder. They are blinded by their own fake success. But that lifestyle is expensive to fake. I leaned in, resting my elbows on the cold glass. Think about Donovan. He is a pathetic scammer pushing a fake crypto scheme. No revenue, no funding. He is surviving on credit cards and my parents' charity. He is desperate for cash to keep this charade alive. And now, he thinks he owns an $800,000 property free and clear. Miller's eyes narrowed. A con artist with a free asset? He won't just sit on it. He will leverage it. He is going to walk into a bank, present that forged deed, and beg for a massive loan. He wants hundreds of thousands in cash for his phantom company and luxury cars. If we arrest my parents now, they take the fall. Sarah plays the victim, and Donovan walks away clean. I don't want them to walk. I want Donovan to sign his name on a federal loan application. Miller leaned back, realizing the play. If Donovan uses a forged deed for a bank loan, he commits federal fraud. He triggers an FBI investigation. Exactly, I said. But we need a safety net. I told Miller to file a quiet cloud on title. A formal notice of an ownership dispute. No public lawsuit, just a discreet red flag buried in the county registry. It would be invisible to anyone checking standard records. Sarah could keep posting, and Donovan could play the CO, never known the landmine was waiting. But the moment he sat down with a bank underwriter, they would run a deep title search. The system would trigger our dispute. The bank would instantly flag the collateral as fraudulent. Miller picked up his gold pen, a sharp smile forming. You want to wait for him to trigger a federal transaction. The moment the bank flags it, we hand our evidence to the feds. I nodded. Let them think they won. Let Donovan dream of that cash injection. We stay silent and wait for the prey to walk in the trap. Miller began drafting the notice. The board was set. The pieces were locked. I felt calm. I went home, poured coffee, and checked an anonymous account. Sarah was posting from the kitchen planning renovations. Donovan was in the living room, loudly pitching his fake crypto project. They looked so happy. So invincible. They had no idea they were dancing on a legal graveyard. I closed the laptop and took a sip of coffee. Just wait. The trap was armed and Donovan's greed would do the rest. 3 weeks passed. The wedding euphoria faded, replaced by the reality of maintaining an $800,000 estate. Heating a sprawling home in winter is expensive. Maintenance and appearances were draining their cash. More importantly, Donovan was running out of time. A fake tech CEO cannot survive without fresh capital. I watched their lives through my tablet while sipping espresso. Sarah documented every moment, bragging to followers about being debt-free. She filmed Donovan at my father's desk, wearing a turtleneck, shouting into his phone about blockchain and finance. It was a perfect performance. But behind the lens, the desperation was becoming obvious. Donovan had no venture capital. His startup was just a landing page. He needed cash to fund his lie. He could not attract investors if he could not pay for dinner. He needed a prop to sell his billionaire persona, a new Porsche Macan, and a massive cash infusion to keep his scam floating. I knew his type. I had taken down dozens of fakes just like him. When a con artist is cornered, they do not back down, they double down. Donovan held what he thought was his trump card, $800,000 in equity. I listened to Sarah's live stream. He was a master manipulator. He did not tell her they were broke. He framed his cash grab as a brilliant business move. I heard him pacing, feeding her the buzzwords he learned online. He told her that keeping money in a house was dead equity. He convinced her that wealthy people leverage assets. He claimed a home equity loan would extract $500,000 in untaxed cash. He pitched it as a power move, promised to dump it into his crypto platform, and multiply it tenfold. To look the part of a tech titan, he insisted on buying a fully loaded Porsche Macan. He pitched a $90,000 SUV as a business expense. Sarah bought it. She had zero financial sense, protected from debt by our parents and my mortgage payments. She didn't grasp interest rates or the danger of leveraging a home for a fake startup. She just saw $500,000 cash and a Porsche. Her social media soon filled with pure delusion. She posted mood boards of luxury interiors and hinted at a massive venture capital deal. She bragged that her husband was disrupting fintech. She was addicted to the idea of being a Silicon Valley power wife. Fueled by Donovan's greed, they skipped local banks, wanting the prestige of a major Chicago institution. He walked in, ready to slap that forged deed on a desk and demand $500,000. I watched her video. She sat in their car, tapping her nails against a folder, giggling about their executive meeting and their massive upgrade. Donovan sat beside her in a sharp navy suit, flashing a smug, arrogant smile. He looked like a man who thought he had outsmarted the world. He truly believed he had stolen my house and humiliated everyone in one clean sweep. I locked my tablet, a cold smile forming. They were driving to bank with a fake paper from a crooked notary, sure of their payday. They had no clue a federal tripwire was waiting the second they handed over that folder. The traps was set. The legal system was about to snap. Miller poured 2 coffees in his office, calm and ready. He handed me a drink. We sat watching the skyline. His screen tracked real estate registries in real time. We weren't guessing anymore, we were watching the gears turn. The estate file just updated. A bank had officially started underwriting a $500,000 line of credit. Julian actually did it. He used a forged deed to claim equity he didn't own. My phone buzzed. Chloe was broadcasting their genius online. She uploaded a 20-minute clip from a Porsche showroom, running her hands over leather and flashing diamond rings. She declared that marrying a tech genius means never having to wait. She stared at the camera, dripping with condescension. I don't get cubicle life, she said, leaning back, working 80 hours for a paycheck. Sad. Limited. No vision. You have to be smart. You need to leverage assets, not earn a wage. She was mocking me, mocking the very career that paid for her roof for 6 years. I sipped my coffee, staying calm. Mark shook his head while she showed off the car trim. The arrogance is staggering, he muttered. They are documenting their own crimes, leaving a trail of intent. Let her talk, I replied, setting my phone down. Every video builds a timeline. It proves they are active participants in fraud. They can't claim ignorance now. I scanned the monitor. The application was moving fast. Federal underwriting is brutal. Banks don't hand over $500,000 because a guy in a suit uses buzzwords. They verify everything. They accepted the initial request. Now came the automated valuation to confirm the property value. A green light flashed. The system confirmed it. Julian must have faked revenue projections to prove he could pay. The bank bought his fraudulent income statements. They accepted the history I paid for, now linked to his name. Initial review complete, Mark noted, pointing at the screen. It moved to the title department. They are initiating a deep background search. I watched the bar fill up. They were digging into records and liens. Chloe uploaded another story from the kitchen. She was unboxing Crystal, announcing a housewarming for the platform launch. He might. Celebrating our new home, she chirped. Big things were coming, just not the kind she expected. I set my mug down. The trap held. Blinded by fake success, they ignored reality. When a federal bank issues a loan, they use title examiners who don't just glance at papers. They pull the entire file, checking every signature. Mark and I watch in silence. The banking software was a cold, emotionless machine. It didn't care about her aesthetic or his persona. It only cared about risk. And that house was a massive red flag. The legal cloud I buried in the registry sat waiting. Bank examiners were already pulling files. It was only a matter of time before their automated system hit my hidden tripwire. I smiled. The downfall would be flawless. 2 days before they're over. Hype party. Time was up. Julian needed that loan to cover the party, the bar, and his flashy new sports car. He sat in the law office with tea. Mark monitored the registry while I watched Chloe's feed. She and Julian were at a down bank, surrounded by legal papers. She posted a photo bragging about securing the bag and living the executive wife life. I zoomed in on her high-res shot. I could clearly see Julian signing the lending agreement. He was binding him to a $500,000 equity loan. He was using property he did not own to swindle a bank. He is signing the final disclosures, I said, my voice sharp. Mark leaned in, eyes glued to the tracking software. Once the ink dries, the agent scans the packet for approval, he explained. Before the cash hits his account, the automated system runs one final check. They have to catch any hidden disputes from the last month. We watched the screen. The tension was electric, like watching a predator step on a landmine. 10 minutes passed. Chloe posted a video of Julian shaking hands with an executive. They thought they won. Then, the monitor flashed red. A harsh warning code filled the screen. The algorithm hit my wall. It bypassed the records my parents faked and collided with the title dispute I buried. There it is, Mark whispered. The bank flagged the collateral. The wire transfer is frozen. The system rejected the money. They were probably walking out right now, clueless. The bank's fraud unit was getting alerts. But I wasn't leaving this to corporate investigators. I wanted the full weight of the federal government. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a thick, organized dossier. I had spent weeks compiling evidence. It had my original deed, the forged one my father used, mortgage payments, and videos where Julian admitted he was stealing the property to fund his startup. Now, the bank's rejection was the final piece. We had proof of attempted bank fraud. I slid the file to my attorney. Send it, I ordered. Mark had a direct line to a contact at the federal field office. He worked with an agent focused on financial crime. Mark attached the digital rejection code to our criminal complaint. He typed a technical email detailing the interconnected crimes. He outlined the fraud conspiracy led by my parents, the identity theft from the forged signature, and the attempted wire fraud. He detailed the bank fraud committed when Julian signed that loan application using a stolen house as collateral. Mark clicked send. The email flew through encrypted servers straight to the feds. I stood by the window looking at the city. The sky was gray, but I felt brilliant. The trap snapped shut. No family excuses, no escaping consequences. Once federal agents open a case, it leaves the victim's hands. The Department of Justice takes over. My parents couldn't beg me a stop because I was just a witness providing facts. Julian wanted to be a tech mogul. My parents wanted to be the elite. Chloe wanted to be an untouchable influencer. They built a world of lies on my stolen equity. Now, the government was about to arrest the cast. The agent just confirmed receipt, Mark said, breaking the silence. They are reviewing the file. Given bank fraud, he expects to secure federal warrants within 48 hours. 48 hours. That meant strike teams would arrive right in the middle of their party. They invited everyone, the country club crowd, business contacts, influencer friends, a celebration of stolen wealth. I watched my reflection and felt a chilling peace. It would be the most memorable party our family ever held. I couldn't wait to watch their empire burn. Friday was bitter, but inside the luxury boutiques, the atmosphere was arrogant. I sat in my penthouse monitoring logs while watching Chloe broadcast her shopping spree. They were convinced $500,000 was hitting their account. Julian planned a victory lap. He and Chloe stood in an exclusive watch boutique. The camera captured velvet trays and champagne. Chloe panned across diamond watches, asking followers to pick a gift for her husband. Julian stood there in a sharp suit, adjusting his cuffs with the smug air of a man who finally made it. They were burning through credit cards they couldn't pay, betting everything on a massive bank transfer that had yet to hit. The classic blunder of every amateur fraudster. They spend the loot before the deal is signed. Back in my office, my secure app chimed. A text from Mark. Just 2 sentences. The wire is moving. The federal hold kicked in. The $500,000 payment had officially left the reserve. For a split second, the money hit Julian's account. But before his phone could even chirp a notification, the federal freeze slammed down. The feds locked every cent. Every linked account went dead instantly. The cash was evidence now. It was stuck in digital limbo. Gone. I pulled up the other feed. Stephanie was bragging on camera, showing off a rose gold chronograph. Julian had picked out a piece costing more than most people earn in 2 years. Then the feed cut. I knew exactly what was next. I had seen this play out dozens of times. Julian would have confidently handed his card to the manager. The manager would swipe it, chatting away, and then the terminal would beep. A sharp, ugly rejection. I could imagine Julian's face tightening as he blamed a bank glitch. He would try a backup card. Another beep. Declined. Contact the bank. The store's polite atmosphere vanished, replaced by a suffocating silence. Clerks exchanged worried glances. Stephanie's smile crumbled, her face burning with total humiliation. Julian's entire ego was built on his wealth. Being rejected in front of his wife and the sales team felt like a gut punch. He pulled out his phone, fingers frantic, trying to prove his accounts were flush with cash. When the app loaded, there was no balance. Just a generic error telling him to contact fraud support immediately. He sat in my quiet living room, savoring the poetic justice. Julian stood in that high-end boutique with a watch he couldn't afford, realizing his financial house of cards had collapsed. He walked out empty-handed, the complimentary champagne turning bitter. He'd spend hours in his leased car screaming at bank drones who would tell him absolutely nothing. Federal rules stop bank staff from tipping off suspects when the feds are watching. Operators just read from a script, claiming the account was under review. The panic finally set in. He had caterers to pay by morning, a luxury car dealer expecting a wire by noon. He had a sprawl estate to maintain and he couldn't even afford a tank of gas. The walls of his scam were closing in, stealing the air from his lungs. He likely called my parents, desperate to know if there was a problem with the deed they signed over. Thomas and Brenda would assure him everything was fine, totally clueless that their forged signatures had triggered a federal trap. They sat in their bubble of denial, blaming bureaucratic delays, blind to the federal agent closing in. Tomorrow was Saturday, the night of their big housewarming bash. They were going to open my home to hundreds of guests, pretending they were Chicago royalty while hiding their terror behind cheap wine. They had no idea the guest list had grown. The caterers and influencers weren't the only ones arriving. I closed my laptop, a deep calm settling over me. I had a dress to pick out. It was going to be one hell of a party. Saturday night hit the Chicago suburbs with a sharp frost, but the estate glowed with blinding light. Valets in crisp vests sprinted around, parking a sea of luxury cars. I watched from the dark of a hired town car. Stephanie and Donovan had blown a fortune on this gala. A string quartet played, notes drifting out whenever the heavy doors swung open. My parents were loving it. Through the bay windows, I saw Thomas laughing with board members, drink in hand. Brenda floated through the crowd, wearing a sequin gown and showing off the house as if she built it herself. Stephanie held court by the stairs, Liv, streaming to followers. Julian, though, looked like he was standing on a trap door. He kept checking his phone, pacing by the kitchen, his smile tight. The fact that his accounts were locked was clearly killing him. He was surrounded by wealth he couldn't afford, praying for a weekend miracle. He wasn't getting a miracle. He was getting me. I checked my watch. Right on time, 4 unmarked black SUVs pulled on the street, moving with synchronized, predatory speed. They blew past the valet and parked right on the lawn. Doors flew open. I stepped out of the town car, cold wind whipping my coat. I didn't come alone. Behind me stood the county sheriff and 6 federal agents in tactical gear with FBIB printed across their backs. We marched up the stone steps. Marched the double open. I shoved the double doors open. The shift from the freezing night to the warm, crowded foyer was jarring. The quartet was right by the door. When the agent stormed in, the cellist faltered. The music died in a discordant crash. Silence hit the house like a shockwave. Over 100 people froze, staring at the door. Stephanie saw me first. Her eyes lit up with pure rage. She handed her phone to bridesmaid and marched over, her silk gown swishing angrily. Caroline, what are you doing here? Stephanie demanded, her voice cutting through the dead silence. You are not invited. Get out of my house before I call security. I didn't say a word. I didn't say a word. I didn't even look at her. I just stepped aside to clear the way. The lead FBI agent stepped forward, his badge clipped to his belt. His face was like stone. He looked past Stephanie, ignoring her outburst, and locked eyes on the two older figures frozen by the fireplace. Thomas and Brenda. My father dropped his glass. It shattered, spilling amber liquid across the hearth. Mom gasped, clutching her chest. They recognized the jackets. They recognized the federal agents walking right toward them. The lead officer boomed, his voice echoing with cold authority. Step away from the crowd and keep your hands where I can see them. Guests scrambled back, parting like the Red Sea, desperate to dodge the unfolding disaster. Whispers rippled through the room as agents formed a tactical circle around my parents. Officer, what is the meaning of this? Dad tried to sound arrogant, but his voice cracked. This is a private home. You cannot just barge in here. You are under arrest by order of the Department of Justice, the agent stated, pulling heavy steel cuffs from his belt. The metallic click echoed in the silent room. You are charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and aggravated identity theft. Mom started hyperventilating, her knees buckling. She reached for Dad, but an agent grabbed her wrist, pinning her arms behind her back. This is a mistake, Mom shrieked, her country club persona shattering. We didn't steal anything. It is our house. We gave it to our daughter. Caroline, tell them. Tell them it is a misunderstanding. I stood still, hands in my pockets, staring her down. I let the coldness in my eyes freeze her breath. You bribed a corrupt notary to forge my signature on a deed, I said, my voice cutting through the silent room. You transferred the house into your name and committed a federal felony. The notary confessed to the FBI an hour ago. He handed over footage of you paying him cash. The crowd gasped. The wealthy socialites who had just been praising Mom were now staring in pure disgust. Donovan pushed through, his face pale and dripping with sweat. Wait, he stammered, holding his hands up. We had nothing to do with this. Stephanie and I just got the deed as a gift. We had no idea it was forged. The agent to him. Interesting defense. It might have worked if you hadn't taken that fake deed to a bank 2 days ago to secure a $500,000 loan. Donovan's jaw dropped. The reality hit him like a wrecking ball. The frozen accounts, the declined cards, it wasn't a glitch. It was a federal sting. You committed bank fraud, the agent said, signaling deputies. That is a separate crime. Your accounts are seized. Stephanie let out a piercing scream. She collapsed to her knees, ruining her dress, sobbing as agents cuffed her husband. Donovan didn't fight. He looked hollow, staring at the floor as his fake tech business vanished into thin air. Mom wept, mascara running down her face as they marched her out. Dad hung his head in shame, refusing to look at the friends he had spent his life trying to impress. They were paraded past me. The flashing police lights caught their humiliated faces. I didn't flinch. I watched them load the people who betrayed me into vans. The party was over. And the estate was mine again, and their reign of manipulation was finally over. The lights faded in the cold Chicago night, leaving the house quiet. The guests had fled the moment they saw the handcuffs, treating the party like a sinking ship. Only Stephanie remained. She was kneeling on the hard foyer, her silk gown stained with champagne and running makeup. She looked up, her face twisted in terror. Caroline, you cannot do this, she sobbed, clutching the banister. Where am I supposed to go? Mom and Dad are arrested. This is my house. I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing. This isn't your home, Claire. It never was. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text. Within 60 seconds, an armored van rolled in the drive. 4 security contractors in tactical gear stepped out, moving fast through the front doors. I kept my team on standby for exactly this moment. Clear the property, I said, voice cold. She has 10 minutes to grab her essentials. Dump the rest. Claire screamed as the men marched past her. They hauled her expensive shoes and makeup into bags, tossing them hard on the frozen lawn. You are a monster, she shrieked, as a guard led her away. You are destroying this family. I watched her stumble through the wind, shivering in her gown. she fell in the snow, buried under the fake life she built with my money. I slammed the oak doors and locked them tight. The house was finally quiet. The rot was gone. 6 months later, federal authorities moved fast, dismantling the people who tried to ruin me. The bank voided the $500,000 loan once the FBI confirmed the fraud. They went further, filing a massive civil suit against Julian, adding to his criminal charges. The fake startup founder was exposed as a con artist with zero revenue and mountain of debt. Facing bank records and the notary's confession, Julian was denied bail. He is sitting in a detention center now, awaiting trial for wire fraud. He faces years in prison, losing his best decked behind bars. My parent fared no better. Arthur and Diane were indicted on multiple felonies. They tried to hire an elite lawyer, but without my secret financial backing, their money vanished. They had to drain their entire retirement just to pay legal fees. It did not save them. The federal evidence was simply too strong to fight. They are both serving time in prison, stripped of their status and their stolen wealth. Claire filed for divorce the moment Julian was indicted, desperate to distance her from the wreckage. But it was too late. It's too late. Without Julian's fake income or my equity, she was left drowning in the massive credit card debts they used to fund their image. The designer clothes, the wedding, the luxury cars, it all collapsed on her at once. She is working a minimum wage job now, buried in collections and living in a tiny studio far from the suburbs she once ruled. As for the estate, the court nullified the forged deed in weeks. Ownership was restored to me. I did not keep the house. It held too many toxic memories. I listed it during a housing shortage. Because I kept the place in pristine condition, it sparked a brutal bidding war. I sold the place for $950,000 cash. I dumped that profit into a safe bond portfolio, locking the deck of my Seattle Freedom, standing on the deck of my Seattle Lake House. The winter slush was gone. Everything was bright. Crisp mountain spring. Sunlight danced off the water. The air tasted perfect. I sipped vintage champagne, savoring the taste of total victory. I not spoken to my relatives since I bolted the doors of that old house for good. I blocked their calls, tossed their desperate jailhouse letters, and scrubbed them from my life. I leaned on the railing, soaking up the sun. I protected my money, held my ground, and legally crushed the vultures trying to drain me. I am finally free, rich, and most of all at peace. I toasted the mountains. Family is not just blood. Family is people who do not forge your name. The chilling story of Sarah is a masterclass in setting boundaries. The lesson is clear. Sharing DNA does not give anyone a pass to steal from you. Society says family is forever, no matter the toxicity. But Sarah broke that myth, proving blind loyalty is just a weapon for those who see you as a bank account. Her win was not just beating a fraud case. It was reclaiming herself. She proved that financial independence is power. When you control your own assets, you take away their leverage. True strength is not screaming for apologies from people who feel no remorse. True power is cold, calculated distance. You do not owe peace to people plotting your downfall. Sometimes, self-love means stepping back and letting them face the wreckage of their own mistakes. You never need to set yours on fire to keep them warm. Real family is built on respect, not greed. Walking away from toxic relatives is a win. If this story helped you set better boundaries, like, subscribe, and share your own story below.